My English teacher lost her mind after her favorite student died and started stalking my friend to become her replacement, so I recorded everything and exposed them in a way they never saw coming. A teacher unalived one of the students twice. I moved school for 6th grade after my parents divorced, and on the first day, my English teacher, Mrs. Waters, called the girl beside me by the wrong name. Emma, she'd say, and Julia would raise her hand anyway. Well, the teacher was old, wore glasses, had terrible posture, so I just figured she got her name mixed up. But then I noticed something strange. She never got anyone else's name wrong. And during silent reading, I watched Mrs. Waters grade a blank paper with nothing written on it, her red pen moving across nothing, writing excellent work in the margins. I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. No one wanted to be friends with the girl in the wheelchair. But by Friday, I couldn't take it anymore. I had an itch that needed to be scratched. So during lunch, I went up to a table of kids that seemed friendly. Hey, so what's the deal with Mrs. Waters and this Emma girl? I asked casually, pretending not to care that much. Suddenly, everyone went silent. Oh great, I thought to myself. Now everyone thinks I'm a freak. But the silence was soon broken by Julia herself. She didn't say anything, just got up to wheel me towards the janitor's closet. Usually I hated when people did that, but this time I didn't mind. And when we were out of earshot, she turned to face me. Did you hear about the SWAT team that came last year? When I nodded, she continued. That wasn't for a gas leak like everyone says. It was a school shooting. My heart dropped. What the F? Shush, she interrupted. It wasn't on the news because the school wanted to protect our identities, but Emma was the only one unalived, and she was Mrs. Waters' favorite student. Suddenly, it all made sense. Julia went on to tell me that Emma was her best friend, and people always said they looked like sisters. So now Mrs. Waters was lying to herself that Emma was still alive through Julia. Apparently someone tried to tell a teacher before, but they told them to stop spreading childish rumors, and nothing was done. But we're not allowed to say anything to Mrs. Waters because it could cause a mental breakdown. Well, I knew my parents would believe me, but she made me pinky promise to never mention it again before wheeling me back to the canteen. And at first, I had every intention of keeping it. Even when Mrs. Waters set the classroom temperature to 68 degrees because Emma gets cold easily, or when she'd bring Julia, who's lactose intolerant, milkshakes during lunch because it was Emma's favorite. But soon things took a dark turn. I was sitting in class beside Julia when Mrs. Waters walked in with a girl I'd never seen before. She looked exactly like Julia, except longer hair and slightly taller. The whole classroom was tense. Nobody was saying anything, but everyone was thinking the same thing. A new Emma replacement. There were tears in the girl's eyes, and her knees trembled as she went to sit down. Mrs. Waters started teaching like usual, but no one was paying attention. We were all too busy staring at the girl who looked like she'd been kidnapped. Meanwhile, Mrs. Waters was smiling with a joy I'd never seen before. She looked like she had won the lottery. And finally, when she turned around to write something on the board, me and the girl locked eyes. She mouthed the words, "Help me." On her wrist were marks like someone had grabbed her. "What's your name?" I whispered. "Bella," she responded. That's when I finally snapped. I couldn't watch another girl get trapped in this sick fantasy. "Her name is Bella," I blurted, slamming my hands on my desk. "Not Emma. Emma is dead." And just as Bella stood up to run, Mrs. Waters barricaded the door with her chair. "No," she exclaimed with tears streaming down her face. "I'm not letting you get away again." By this point, everyone had had enough, and everyone was helping Bella get out. When the police arrived and they handcuffed her, she was thrashing around like a caged animal. It took 3 officers to restrain her while she wailed, "No, please, I can't let Emma die again," she yelled over and over. Luckily, the officers were well trained, and you could tell they put her into the patrol car as gently as possible. Bella was brought home to her dad, who had already gathered a search party to look for her. Turns out Mrs. Waters had snatched her while she was standing at the school bus. That evening when my parents came home, I was going to tell them everything that had been going on, but turns out they already knew. Because as soon as they saw me, they started screaming at me for causing Mrs. Waters to be arrested. They were standing in the kitchen doorway, my mom clutching a manila folder while my dad paced back and forth across the living room carpet. I wheeled myself closer, trying to understand what was happening. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Mom's voice cracked as she waved the folder at me. "Margaret Waters' sister has been calling us all afternoon. She says you made up this whole story for attention." I gripped my wheelchair handles tighter. "Made it up? Mom, there were 30 other kids in that classroom who saw everything." Dad stopped pacing and turned to face me. "That's not what Margaret is saying. She claims her sister was having a bad day, and you exaggerated everything to get her in trouble." "A bad day?" My voice rose higher than I intended. "She kidnapped a girl named Bella from a bus stop." Mom slammed the folder on the counter, papers spilling out. "Stop it. Just stop. We've already had 3 phone calls from other parents saying you've been spreading lies about a beloved teacher who's been at that school for 20 years. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My hands started shaking as I watched them exchange worried glances. Dad walked over and knelt beside my wheelchair, putting his hand on my shoulder. "Sweetheart, we know moving schools has been hard, and with the divorce." He trailed off, looking at Mom for support. "We think maybe you misunderstood the situation." Mom finished for him. Mrs. Waters' sister Margaret explained that her sister has been under a lot of stress since losing a student last year. She sometimes gets confused, but she would never hurt anyone. I jerked away from Dad's hand. "Confused?" "She called Julia by a dead girl's name for a whole week. She graded blank papers. She tried to keep Bella locked in the classroom." "Lower your voice," Mom warned, glancing toward the windows. "The neighbors don't need to hear this." That's when I noticed the papers from the folder. Bank statements with highlighted deposits, legal documents with words like defamation and emotional distress scattered throughout. My stomach dropped. What is all this? I reached for one of the papers, but Mom quickly gathered them up. "Nothing you need to worry about," she said, shoving everything back into the folder. "Margaret is just helping us understand the situation better." The next morning, I woke up to find a woman I'd never seen before sitting at our kitchen table. She was drinking coffee with my parents, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. When she saw me, her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You must be the young lady I've heard so much about," she said, standing up. "I'm Margaret, Mrs. Waters' sister." I froze in the doorway. Mom jumped up and wheeled me to the table before I could back away. "Margaret was just explaining how this whole misunderstanding happened," Dad said, pouring orange juice into a glass for me. Margaret leaned forward, her perfume overwhelming. "Your parents told me you're quite imaginative. That's wonderful for a child your age, but sometimes imagination can run wild, can't it?" I stared at her, refusing to answer. She continued anyway. "My sister has dedicated her life to teaching. What happened yesterday was simply a case of her trying to help a new student feel welcome. The girl you called Bella, her name is actually Emma. She's a transfer student who was nervous about starting at a new school." "That's not true," I said firmly. "Her name was Bella. She had marks on her wrists. She asked for help." Margaret's smile tightened. "Children often misremember details when they're excited. I've spoken to Emma's family, and they're quite upset about the accusations you've made." Mom placed her hand over mine. "Honey, Margaret has been very understanding about this whole situation. conversation. She's not pressing charges, but we need to make sure nothing like this happens again. Charges? I looked between my parents trying to understand what was happening. They both avoided my eyes. After Margaret left, I heard my parents arguing in hushed tones in their bedroom. I wheeled myself quietly down the hallway and pressed my ear against the door. I don't like this, Dad was saying. What if she's telling the truth? And what if she's not? Mom shot back. Do you want to lose the house fighting a defamation lawsuit? Margaret showed me the papers. She has a whole team of lawyers ready to destroy us. But the other kids saw it too. Margaret says they're all retracting their statements. Their parents don't want to get involved. I wheeled myself back to my room, my mind racing. I needed to talk to Julia, but when I tried calling her house, her mom said she wasn't available. I tried 3 more times throughout the day with the same result. That night at dinner, Mom announced that the principal had called a meeting for the next morning. He wants to discuss Mrs. Waters' return to the classroom, she said, not looking at me. Return? I dropped my fork. She kidnapped someone. Stop saying that, Dad said sharply. We've been over this. It was a misunderstanding. The meeting was held in the school auditorium. Parents filled the rows of seats while students sat in a separate section. I tried to wheel myself over to Julia, but a teacher directed me to sit with my parents instead. Principal Johnson stood at the podium, clearing his throat repeatedly before speaking. I know there's been some concern about yesterday's incident in Mrs. Waters' classroom. After a thorough investigation and consultation with mental health professionals, we've determined that Mrs. Waters experienced a momentary lapse in judgment due to grief. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw Julia in the student section, her face pale and drawn. Mrs. Waters will be returning to her position after completing a brief counseling program, the principal continued. We believe in second chances and supporting our dedicated educators through difficult times. A parent raised her hand. What about the safety of our children? I assure you, all necessary precautions will be taken. Mrs. Waters is a valued member of our community who has taught here for 2 decades without incident. I wanted to scream that there had been an incident, that she'd been calling Julia the wrong name all week, but Mom's hand clamped down on my arm in warning. After the meeting, I finally managed to corner Julia by the water fountains. This is insane, I whispered. How can they just let her come back? Julia looked around nervously before pulling out a crumpled envelope from her backpack. She's been writing to me, she said, shoving it into my hands. From the treatment center. Look at it when you get home. That evening, I locked myself in my room and opened the envelope. Inside were 3 letters, each one more disturbing than the last. The handwriting was shaky, switching between addressing Julia and Emma mid-sentence. There were drawings too, sketches of 2 girls who looked identical, holding hands and smiling. At the bottom of one letter, she'd written, I knew you'd come back to me, Emma. We'll be together forever this time. I hid the letters under my mattress and went to show my parents, but they were in the living room with Margaret again. She was handing them a check. This is just for your cooperation, I heard her say. Consider it compensation for the stress this situation has caused your family. I backed away before they could see me, my wheels squeaking on the hardwood floor. They were being paid off. My own parents were taking money to keep quiet about what Mrs. Waters had done. The next few days blurred together. My wheelchair started having problems, the brakes sticking at odd moments, the wheels wobbling when they'd been fine before. Dad mentioned he'd had it serviced by a new repair shop Margaret had recommended, her nephew's place. It's much cheaper than the usual place, he said, not noticing my alarm. I started keeping track of everything in a notebook, documenting the strange occurrences. Mom began limiting my computer time, claiming I was becoming obsessed with researching Mrs. Waters. They took my phone away at night, saying I needed better sleep. One afternoon, I overheard Mom on a call in the pantry. I recognized Margaret's voice through the speaker, tinny but clear. Homeschooling would be best, Margaret was saying. The girl clearly has behavioral issues that need addressing. I know an excellent program that specializes in troubled children. I don't know, Mom replied. She's never had problems before, haven't she? A child who makes up such elaborate lies? Who causes such disruption? Think about your other options here. I remembered my old iPod hidden in my closet, the one my parents had forgotten about when they upgraded my phone. I grabbed it and started recording, holding it up to the crack under the pantry door. The program is very discreet, Margaret continued. No one would have to know the real reason for the transfer. We could say it's for her physical therapy needs. I'll discuss it with her father, Mom said finally. I saved the recording and wheeled myself back to my room, my heart pounding. They were planning to pull me out of school entirely. That Sunday, Mom dragged me to church, something we rarely did. I realized why when I saw Margaret holding court with a group of women in the fellowship hall. Such a shame, she was saying as we approached. The poor child has been through so much with her parents' divorce. Sometimes trauma manifests in attention-seeking behaviors. The women turned to look at me with pitying expressions. One of them patted my head like I was a dog. We'll be praying for her, another woman assured my mom. Margaret told us all about her difficulties. I wanted to defend myself, but Mom's grip on my wheelchair handles was like iron as she pushed me past them. Things escalated when Julia's parents reached out to mine, asking to meet privately. I wasn't supposed to know about it, but I heard Dad on the phone arranging to meet them at a coffee shop downtown. When they returned, both my parents looked shaken. What did they want? I asked, pretending I just noticed them come in. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. Nothing important, Mom said, just discussing school matters. But later, I heard them arguing again. Legal adoption? Dad was saying. She tried to legally adopt Julia during her treatment. Keep your voice down, Mom hissed. Margaret says it was just paperwork confusion. Her sister was grief-stricken and filled out the wrong forms. Wrong forms? You don't accidentally fill out adoption papers. I crept back to my room and texted Julia from my iPod, using the weak Wi-Fi signal from our neighbors that my parents didn't know I could access. She confirmed what I'd overheard. Mrs. Waters had somehow gotten hold of Julia's personal information and tried to start adoption proceedings, claiming Julia's parents were unfit. The next morning, I woke up to find my parents packing suitcases. What's going on? I asked, wheeling myself into their room. We're taking a little trip, Mom said, not meeting my eyes, just for a few days, to clear our heads. I noticed a brochure sticking out of her purse. Peaceful Paths Therapeutic Boarding School was printed across the top. My blood ran cold. I'm not going, I said firmly. Dad sighed. Sweetheart, you don't have a choice. We've enrolled you in a program that will help you work through these issues. Issues? You mean telling the truth about Mrs. Waters? Enough, Mom snapped. This obsession ends now. Margaret was right. You need professional help. I locked myself in my room, barricading the door with my dresser. While they pounded on the door, demanding I come out, I used my iPod to email everyone I could think of. Julia, her parents, even Bella's family if I could find them. It was Julia who saved me. Within an hour, she was at our front door with her parents and a police officer. Not to arrest anyone, but to perform a wellness check after Julia had told them about my parents' plan to send me away. The commotion drew Margaret out of whatever hole she'd been hiding in. She showed up just as the officer was questioning my parents about the boarding school. This is a family matter, she said, trying to insert herself between the officer and my parents. The child has been causing problems for weeks. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back, the officer said. That's when Julia Julia's mom pulled out a thick folder. "Officer, we have some concerns about this woman and her sister. We've documented numerous incidents of harassment and stalking." Margaret's face went red. "How dare you? I'll sue you for slander. Then you'll be interested in this," Julia's dad said, producing a storage unit key. "We found out Mrs. Waters has been renting a unit filled with photos of our daughter. Hundreds of them. Some doctored to make her look more like Emma." The officer's expression changed. "I think we need to continue this conversation at the station." As Margaret sputtered and protested, I finally found the courage to speak up. "I have recordings," I said, pulling out my iPod, "of her and my mom planning to send me away because I told the truth about her sister." The investigation that followed revealed more than anyone had expected. Margaret had been enabling her sister's delusions for years, feeding into her fantasy that Emma was still alive rather than getting her proper help. She'd provided Mrs. Waters with information about school bus routes and student schedules. She'd been paying off families and threatening others to keep quiet about her sister's increasingly erratic behavior. Bella's father, who we finally managed to contact, confirmed that Margaret had been harassing them too, trying to convince them not to press charges. He'd kept detailed records of every interaction. When they searched Mrs. Waters' storage unit, they found journals dating back years, filled with elaborate fantasies about Emma being alive, about finding a replacement daughter. Margaret had known about all of it. Both sisters were arrested. Margaret was charged with conspiracy and witness intimidation. Mrs. Waters was finally placed in a proper psychiatric facility where she could get real help, not just her sister's enabling. My parents sat in our living room, the check from Margaret torn up on the coffee table between us. Mom couldn't stop crying. "We're so sorry," she kept saying. She was so convincing. And the threats of lawsuits, losing the house. "We failed you," Dad added, his voice rough. "We should have believed you from the start." It took time to rebuild trust. We started family therapy, working through not just this incident, but the divorce and all the changes that had come with it. The school board implemented new protocols for reporting concerning behavior, with mandatory investigation procedures that couldn't be brushed aside. Julia and I grew closer through the ordeal. We both attended therapy to process what had happened. It helped to have someone who understood, who had been there too. Bella's family successfully sued the school district for negligence. The money would help pay for Bella's therapy and ensure she got the support she needed to heal from her trauma. As for Mrs. Waters, the last I heard, she was responding well to treatment. Without Margaret there to feed her delusions, she was finally able to begin processing her grief over Emma's death properly. The whole experience taught me something valuable about speaking up, even when the adults around you don't want to listen. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes it's easier for people to believe a convenient lie than face a difficult reality. But that doesn't mean we should stop telling the truth. It just means we need to keep telling it until someone finally listens. The weeks that followed should have been peaceful, but Margaret had other plans. The first sign of trouble came when I returned to school after winter break. A substitute teacher stood at the front of our classroom, introducing herself as Ms. Catherine Thompson. "Where's our regular teacher?" someone asked. "She had a family emergency," Ms. Thompson replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I'll be covering for the next few weeks." Something about her felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. She moved through the lesson efficiently, never once mixing up names or grading invisible papers. Yet every time she looked at Julia, her expression would soften in a way that made my skin crawl. During lunch, I wheeled myself over to Julia's table. "Is it just me, or is something off about the substitute?" Julia pushed her food around her plate. "My mom got a weird call last night, someone asking about my schedule, pretending to be from the school office. But when she called the school to verify, they said they never made that call. My appetite vanished. We should tell someone." "Tell them what? That we're paranoid because of what happened before?" Julia shook her head. "Nobody's going to believe us without proof." She was right. After the whole Margaret situation, people treated us like we were fragile, traumatized kids who saw danger everywhere. Even my parents, despite their apologies, would exchange worried looks whenever I mentioned anything suspicious. The substitute stayed for 3 weeks. During that time, small things started happening. Julia's locker combination was changed without her knowledge. Her backpack went missing during gym class, only to reappear with all her emergency contact information photocopied. Someone kept leaving milkshakes on her desk with notes that said, "From a friend." I started documenting everything again, but this time I was more careful. I used a physical notebook that I kept with me at all times, and I took photos with an old digital camera my parents had forgotten about. No iPod this time. They monitored all my devices now. One afternoon, I stayed after school to use the library. As I wheeled past an empty classroom, I heard voices inside. I recognized Ms. Thompson's voice immediately. "She looks so much like her," she was saying. "It's uncanny." Margaret was right about that. My blood froze. I positioned myself where I could see through the door's window without being spotted. Ms. Thompson was on the phone, pacing back and forth. "No, I understand the terms," she continued. "Margaret made it very clear. I help her with this, and she helps me with my teaching license situation. But following the girl around feels wrong." I fumbled for my camera, managing to snap a few photos through the glass. Ms. Thompson turned toward the door, and I quickly wheeled myself around the corner, my heart pounding. That evening, I tried to tell my parents about what I'd overheard. They listened, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. "Honey," Mom said gently, "Ms. Thompson is just a substitute teacher. The school thoroughly vets everyone they hire." "But she mentioned Margaret," I insisted. Dad rubbed his temples. "Sweetheart, Margaret is in jail awaiting trial. She can't hurt anyone anymore. She could still have people on the outside helping her," I argued. My parents exchanged that look again, the one that said they thought I was being paranoid. "We'll mention it to your therapist at your next session," Mom said, effectively ending the conversation. But I knew what I'd heard. Margaret might be in jail, but she clearly had plans in motion. I needed more evidence, something undeniable. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Ms. Thompson announced she was organizing an after-school tutoring program for struggling students. She personally invited Julia to attend, claiming her recent test scores showed she needed extra help. Julia's grades were fine, but Ms. Thompson insisted. "My parents think I should go," Julia told me. "They don't want to seem uncooperative after everything that's happened." "Then I'm coming with you," I said. "You don't need tutoring." "I'll tell them I do. My parents are so worried about my trauma, they'll probably think it's good for me to focus on schoolwork." I was right. My parents were thrilled when I expressed interest in the tutoring program. They saw it as a sign I was moving past my fixation on the Margaret situation. The first tutoring session was normal enough. 5 students showed up, including me and Julia. Ms. Thompson went through math problems on the board, occasionally checking our work. But I noticed she kept finding excuses to stand near Julia, to touch her shoulder when pointing out corrections, to use her work as examples for the group. After the session, as everyone was packing up, Ms. Thompson asked Julia to stay behind. "I have some additional materials that might help you," she said. I pretended to struggle with my backpack zipper, buying time. The other students filed out, leaving just the 3 of us. "Actually," Ms. Thompson said, glancing at me, "this is rather personal. Julia, would you mind if we spoke privately?" "I'll wait outside," I said, but I only went as far as the hallway. I positioned myself where I could see through the narrow window in the door. Ms. Thompson pulled out a folder and showed Julia something inside. I couldn't see what it was, but Julia's face went pale. She shook her head, backing away from the desk. Ms. Thompson reached out, grabbing Julia's wrist, not roughly, but firmly enough to stop her from leaving. I burst back through the door. Let her go! Ms. Thompson released Julia immediately, her expression shifting to one of concern. Oh dear, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was just showing Julia some advanced study materials. Then why did she look scared? I demanded. I wasn't scared, Julia said quickly, but her voice shook. Just surprised. The math problems looked really hard. Ms. Thompson smiled. Exactly. Perhaps we got a bit too ambitious for the first session. Why don't you both head home? We'll start with something simpler next time. Outside, I grabbed Julia's arm. What did she show you? Julia looked around nervously before pulling me into the accessible bathroom. She locked the door and pulled out her phone, showing me a photo she'd managed to take of the folder's contents. It was a legal document. Adoption papers, with Julia's name on them. She said Margaret wanted to make sure I was taken care of, Julia whispered. That she'd arranged for Ms. Thompson to become my legal guardian if anything happened to my parents. We're going to the police, I said immediately. With what? A substitute teacher showed me some papers? They'll say we misunderstood, just like before. She was right. We needed more. We needed to prove the connection between Ms. Thompson and Margaret. I spent the next few days researching Ms. Thompson online. Her social media was sparse, mostly professional posts about education. But I found an old news article about a teaching license being revoked 5 years ago. The photo was grainy, but the woman looked similar to Ms. Thompson. The name was different though. Catherine Winters. Catherine Winters. Catherine Waters. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just someone helping Margaret. This was another sister. I printed out everything I could find and showed it to Julia during lunch. Her face went white as she read through the articles. 3 sisters, she breathed. Margaret never mentioned another sister, because she was probably keeping her in reserve, I said, in case the first plan failed. We decided to gather more evidence before going to anyone. We couldn't afford to be dismissed again. Julia started recording the tutoring sessions on her phone, hiding it in her pencil case. I took photos of Ms. Thompson's car, noting the license plate and the box of files in her back seat. The breakthrough came when Ms. Thompson made a mistake. She left her phone on the desk during a tutoring session while she went to the bathroom. Without thinking, I wheeled myself over and took a photo of her recent calls. Margaret's lawyer's number was at the top of the list, but Ms. Thompson, or Catherine, as I now thought of her, came back sooner than expected. She saw me with my camera pointed at her phone. What are you doing? Her voice was ice cold. I dropped my pencil. I lied, lowering the camera. I was just trying to see where it rolled. She stared at me for a long moment before picking up her phone. I think you should go home early today. You seem distracted. I left, but not before seeing her make a call. I couldn't hear the words, but her expression was grim. That night, my wheelchair's brakes failed completely while I was going down the ramp outside our house. I would have rolled straight into the street if Dad hadn't grabbed the handles at the last second. We just had this serviced, he muttered, examining the wheels. I'll call the repair shop in the morning. But I knew this wasn't a coincidence. Catherine was escalating. The next day at school, Julia wasn't there. Her mom called mine, saying Julia had food poisoning and would be out for a few days. But when I texted Julia from my hidden iPod, she responded immediately. I'm fine. My parents are keeping me home. No, someone called them pretending to be from child services, saying they'd received a complaint about neglect. My parents are freaking out. I knew we couldn't wait any longer. I gathered all my evidence, the photos, the articles, everything, and put it in a folder. But before I could decide what to do with it, Principal Johnson called me to his office. Catherine was there, sitting across from his desk with a concerned expression. I've asked you here because Ms. Thompson has some concerns about your behavior, the principal said. My behavior? I couldn't believe this was happening again. Catherine leaned forward. I've noticed you've been taking photos during class, following me around the school. I understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but this fixation on teachers is becoming disruptive. She's not who she says she is, I said, looking directly at the principal. Her name is Catherine Winters, and she's Margaret Waters' sister. The principal's expression didn't change. That's a very serious accusation. Do you have any proof? I reached for my backpack, but it wasn't there. I'd left it in the classroom when I was called to the office. It's in my bag. If you just let me get it. I think what's best, Catherine interrupted smoothly, is for us to call your parents. This paranoia is clearly affecting your education. I'm not paranoid, I insisted, but I could see I was losing. Without my evidence, I had nothing. My parents arrived within 20 minutes. Catherine spoke to them in low, concerned tones about my obsessive behavior and unfounded accusations. She suggested that maybe I needed more intensive therapy, perhaps even a short stay at a treatment facility for evaluation. I watched in horror as my parents nodded along, their faces creased with worry. They were falling for it again. We'll discuss this at home, Dad said finally, but I could see he was already convinced. As we left the office, I made one last desperate attempt. Check her employment records, I told the principal. Her real name is Catherine Winters. She's related to Margaret Waters. The principal's expression softened. I'll look into it, he said, but I could tell he was just humoring me. At home, my parents sat me down for another serious talk. They used words like regression and fixation and professional help. They'd already made some calls, found a place that specialized in trauma-related disorders in adolescence. It's just for a few weeks, Mom said, until you can work through this. I was trapped. Without my evidence, without Julia to back me up, I had nothing. They were going to send me away, just like Margaret had planned. That night, I lay in bed thinking frantically. I needed help, but everyone who might believe me was either unable to help or unwilling to listen. Then I remembered something. Bella's father. He'd believed us before. He'd kept records. I waited until my parents were asleep, then used my iPod to find his contact information online. I sent him a desperate email explaining everything, attaching the few photos I'd managed to upload to cloud storage before my backpack disappeared. The next morning, my parents were packing a suitcase for me when the doorbell rang. It wasn't Bella's father. It was Julia's parents, and they looked furious. We need to talk, Julia's mom said, pushing past my surprised mother, about Ms. Thompson. It turned out that Julia had been doing her own investigation. She'd found Catherine's teaching license revocation records and discovered the reason. She'd been caught trying to forge adoption papers for a student at her previous school, a student who looked remarkably like her deceased daughter. She's done this before, Julia's dad said, and now she's trying to do it to our daughter. My parents finally started listening. Julia's parents had brought copies of everything, including phone records showing calls between Catherine and Margaret's lawyer. They'd also discovered that Catherine had been visiting Margaret in jail regularly, listed as her sister on the visitor logs. We went to the police this morning, Julia's mom said. They're investigating, but we wanted to warn you. This woman is dangerous. The relief I felt was overwhelming. Finally, someone believed us. But Catherine must have sensed the walls closing in. When the police went to the school to question her, she was gone. Her classroom was empty, her car missing from the parking lot. She'd vanished just like that, leaving behind only a resignation letter citing family emergencies. case. The police searched her apartment and found disturbing evidence. Photos of Julia taken from a distance, copies of her school records, medical files, even her birth certificate. There were letters from Margaret, coaching Catherine on how to gain Julia's trust, how to isolate her from support systems, how to make the adoption seem like Julia's idea. They also found plans for me. Margaret had labeled me the obstacle and outlined various ways to discredit me or remove me from the situation. The wheelchair brake tampering was just the beginning. A warrant was issued for Catherine's arrest, but she'd had a head start. For days, we all lived in fear, wondering when she might reappear. Julia stayed home from school. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere alone. The police increased patrols around our neighborhoods. Then, a week later, she made her move. Julia's parents had gone to the grocery store, leaving Julia home with her older brother. He was in his room gaming with headphones on when Catherine somehow got into the house. Julia later told me she'd been in the kitchen when she heard the back door open. She turned to see Catherine standing there, holding a folder of papers and car keys. "Don't scream," Catherine had said. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to talk," to explain. But Julia had learned from what happened with Mrs. Waters. She grabbed a pot from the stove and threw it at Catherine, then ran for the front door screaming for help. The neighbors heard and called 911. Catherine tried to flee, but she ran straight into the police patrol that had been watching the house. They arrested her in the driveway, still clutching those adoption papers. The trial was a media circus. 3 sisters, all teachers, all involved in an elaborate plot to kidnap and illegally adopt a student. The story was so bizarre that national news picked it up, though our names were kept out of it. Catherine was charged with attempted kidnapping, stalking, conspiracy, and identity fraud. She'd been using fake credentials to get the substitute teaching position. The school's background check system had failed spectacularly. During the trial, the full extent of the sisters' delusions came out. They'd lost a younger sister named Emma in a car accident 20 years ago. She'd been 8, the same age as the Emma who died in the school shooting. The trauma had broken something in all 3 of them, but they'd hidden it well, supporting each other's fantasies instead of seeking help. Margaret had been the ringleader, but Catherine was just as deep in the delusion. She truly believed she was saving Julia, giving her a better life. The 3rd sister, Mrs. Waters, had been the most fragile, the one who'd cracked first under the weight of grief. Catherine was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Margaret got 25 for conspiracy and orchestrating the whole plan. Mrs. Waters remained in psychiatric care, slowly working through 2 decades of unprocessed grief. The school district implemented massive reforms. Background checks became more thorough. A new reporting system was created for concerning behavior. Training was mandated for all staff on recognizing signs of mental health crises. My family started healing too. The 2nd crisis had actually brought us closer together. My parents realized they needed to trust me more, to listen when I raised concerns instead of dismissing them as trauma responses. Julia and I remained close friends. We'd been through something extraordinary together, something that bonded us in a way that was hard to explain to others. We still attended therapy, but now it was more about processing what had happened than convincing people it was real. Bella's family reached out to us during the trial. Bella was doing better, though she still had nightmares sometimes. Her father thanked us for stopping Catherine before she could hurt anyone else. He said Bella wanted to be a social worker when she grew up, to help other kids who'd been through trauma. The last time I saw Margaret was during her sentencing. She looked smaller somehow, deflated. When the judge read the verdict, she didn't react. But as they led her away, she turned to look at Julia one last time. There was still that hunger in her eyes, that desperate need to replace what she'd lost. It sent chills down my spine. The experience taught me something valuable about patterns, how people who are broken in the same way can find each other, can enable each other's worst impulses instead of helping each other heal, how grief, when left to fester, can twist love into something dangerous. But it also taught me about resilience, about speaking up even when people don't want to listen, about finding allies in unexpected places, about the strength that comes from surviving something together. Julia and I graduated middle school together. We went to different high schools, but we stayed in touch. Every year on the anniversary of Bella's rescue, we'd meet up and talk about how far we'd come. The Waters sisters were a cautionary tale in our town for years afterward. Parents used them as examples of why it's important to process grief, to seek help when you need it, to face reality even when fantasy seems easier. But for me, they were a reminder of something else, that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who believe they're doing the right thing, the ones who've convinced themselves that their delusions are love, that their obsessions are care. And that's why we can never stop being vigilant, never stop speaking up, never stop protecting each other, because there are always more broken people out there, looking for someone to fill the void in their hearts. And sometimes, they're closer than we think. The months after Catherine's sentencing should have brought peace, but I'd learned that broken people rarely work alone. The first warning sign came through Julia during our weekly video call. She'd started high school at Westfield Academy while I'd enrolled at Central High, but we made sure to check in regularly. "There's a new guidance counselor," Julia said, her voice strained. "Ms. Sarah Winters. She keeps asking about my home life, suggesting I join her special mentoring program." My blood turned to ice. Winters. Again. "Julia, you need to tell your parents immediately. I already tried. They think I'm being paranoid because of everything that happened. The school says she passed all background checks." I grabbed my notebook, the same one I'd used to document Catherine's behavior. What does she look like? Blonde hair, always in a bun, blue eyes. She has this way of staring that makes you feel like she's memorizing everything about you. Over the next few days, I researched Sarah Winters obsessively. Unlike Catherine, she had a seemingly legitimate online presence, teaching credentials, professional references, even a LinkedIn profile showing 10 years of counseling experience. But something felt wrong. The photos on her profiles were all slightly blurry, taken from distances that made facial features hard to distinguish. I called Bella's father. He'd become our unofficial advisor after everything we'd been through. "Another Winters?" His voice was grim. "I'll look into it. In the meantime, tell Julia to avoid being alone with her." But Julia's parents had already signed her up for the mentoring program, thinking it would help her process her trauma. The first session was scheduled for the following Monday. I convinced my parents to let me visit Julia that weekend. They were hesitant at first, worried I was falling back into old patterns, but eventually agreed when I explained I just missed my friend. Julia and I spent Saturday afternoon going through yearbooks from Mrs. Waters' old schools, looking for any mention of Sarah. We found nothing, but then Julia remembered something. "Wait," she said, pulling out her phone. "During Catherine's trial, they mentioned something about family photos found in her apartment. We searched through news articles until we found it. A brief mention of family photographs, including images of the 3 sisters and their deceased younger sibling Emma. 3 sisters, not 4. So who is Sarah Winters?" I asked. Julia's face paled. "What if she's not a sister? What if she's a friend? Someone who shared their grief? Someone who understood their loss?" I finished. We needed proof. Real, undeniable proof that wouldn't be dismissed as teenage paranoia. That Sunday, I borrowed my dad's car. He'd finally taught me to drive using hand controls, and we drove to the public records office. We searched through death certificates, looking for children named named Emma who died around the same time as the Waters sisters' Emma. We found her. Emma Chen, age 8, died in the same car accident 20 years ago. The accident that had culled the Waters' Emma. They'd been best friends, according to the obituary. 2 families destroyed in one moment. Look at this. Julia pointed to the surviving family section. Parents, David and Linda Chen. Siblings, Sarah, age 12. Sarah Chen, Sarah Winters. We made copies of everything and drove straight to the police station. The desk sergeant looked skeptical until we mentioned the Waters case. Then he called Detective Morrison, who'd handled the original investigation. Morrison listened carefully, taking notes. We'll look into it, he promised. But without concrete evidence linking Sarah Chen to Sarah Winters, our hands are tied. Monday came too quickly. Julia's parents dropped her off at school early for her mentoring session. I skipped my first period and drove to Westfield Academy, parking where I could see the guidance office windows. Through my phone, Julia texted me updates. She's asking about my family again, wants to know if I ever feel misunderstood. 20 minutes in, she's showing me photos of inspirational women who overcame tragedy. One looks like a young Mrs. Waters. 30 minutes. She just locked the door, says it's for privacy. I called 911, but what could I say? That a guidance counselor locked a door during a private session? They'd think I was crazy. Then Julia's text stopped. I waited 5 agonizing minutes before wheeling myself into the school. The security guard recognized me from the Waters incident and waved me through. I reached the guidance office just as the door opened. Sarah Winters stood there, her hand on Julia's shoulder. Julia looked dazed, confused. Oh, hello, Sarah said pleasantly. Julia was just telling me about her friend. Would you like to join us? Julia needs to come with me, I said firmly. Now. Sarah's grip on Julia's shoulder tightened slightly. I don't think that's appropriate. We're in the middle of an important discussion about Julia's future. That's when I noticed the teacup on the desk, steam still rising from it. Julia's eyes kept drifting closed. What did you give her? I demanded. Just some calming tea. Julia's been so anxious lately. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Julia, did you consent to drinking that tea? Julia shook her head slowly, struggling to focus. She said it was required, part of the program. Sarah's pleasant expression cracked. You're disrupting a therapeutic session. I'll have to call security. Call them, I said. Call everyone. I want witnesses when they test whatever you put in that tea. For a moment, we stared at each other. Then Sarah made her move. She pulled Julia back into the office, trying to close the door. But I'd learned from Mrs. Waters. I jammed my wheelchair in the doorway, ignoring the pain as the door crashed into my leg. Help! I screamed. Someone help! She's drugging students. Teachers came running. The security guard appeared. In the chaos, Sarah released Julia, who stumbled toward me. The principal arrived, demanding explanations. Test the tea, I kept saying. Test the tea. Sarah tried to leave, claiming she needed to get security footage to prove I was harassing her, but Detective Morrison arrived before she could escape. He'd been on his way to question her when he heard the 911 dispatch. The tea tested positive for a powerful sedative. Sarah's real name was indeed Sarah Chen. She'd been corresponding with all 3 Waters sisters for years, bonding over their shared loss. She'd helped plan everything, staying hidden in case the others were caught. Her apartment was a shrine to both Emmas. Photos covered every wall. She had detailed files on Julia and several other students who resembled the dead girls. The police found adoption papers, forged documents, and a journal outlining her plan to complete the family by taking Julia and another girl named Emily from a neighboring school. During questioning, Sarah broke down completely. She talked about the accident, how she'd been supposed to be in the car that day, but had stayed home sick. The survivor's guilt had eaten at her for 20 years. When she'd found the Waters sisters online in a grief support forum, they'd validated her pain, told her it wasn't her fault, promised they'd all heal together by bringing Emma back. The investigation revealed a whole network of people the sisters had manipulated online. Grieving parents, siblings, friends, all convinced that replacing lost children was a form of therapy. Several other attempts had been made across the country, though none as elaborate as the Waters conspiracy. Sarah was charged with attempted kidnapping, drugging a minor, conspiracy, and fraud. She got 18 years. The online network was disbanded, its members flagged for monitoring. Julia recovered from the drugging with no lasting physical effects, but the psychological impact was harder to shake. She transferred to my school, unable to feel safe at Westfield despite increased security measures. We spent the rest of our high school years looking over our shoulders. Every new teacher, every substitute, every counselor was met with suspicion. Our parents had to balance protecting us with letting us live normal lives. Detective Morrison became a family friend of sorts. He'd check in periodically, let us know if any of the Waters associates were released, or if new threats emerged. He told us that Mrs. Waters had made significant progress in treatment, finally accepting Emma's death. But Margaret and Catherine remained unrepentant, still writing letters to each other about their stolen daughter. Julia and I took self-defense classes together. We learned to trust our instincts, to speak up immediately when something felt wrong. We became advocates for student safety, pushing for better background checks and mandatory reporting systems. Our senior year, we were invited to speak at a conference about school safety. We shared our story with hundreds of educators and parents. It was terrifying but cathartic. For the first time, we controlled the narrative. After graduation, Julia went to college for social work. I studied criminal justice. We wanted to help other kids who might face similar dangers, to be the advocates we'd needed. The Waters sisters' story became a case study in grief-induced psychosis and institutional failures. Laws were changed, systems were improved, but we knew there would always be broken people looking for ways to fill the voids in their hearts. On the 5th anniversary of Bella's rescue, we organized a reunion. Bella came with her parents, now a confident young woman studying psychology. Detective Morrison attended, proud of how we'd all grown. Even some of our former classmates came, sharing how the experience had shaped their lives. As we sat together, sharing stories and laughing at happier memories, I realized something important. The Waters sisters had tried to steal Julia to replace their loss. They'd failed because you can't replace people. Each person is unique, irreplaceable. But in trying to stop them, we'd built something real. Friendships forged in crisis, bonds that couldn't be broken. We'd learned to protect each other, to speak truth even when it was hard, to trust our instincts and demand to be heard. That night, Julia and I stood outside looking at the stars. Tomorrow we'd go back to our separate colleges, our different paths, but we'd always be connected by what we'd survived together. Do you think it's really over? Julia asked. I thought about Margaret and Catherine in prison, about Sarah starting her sentence, about Mrs. Waters slowly healing, about all the broken people still out there, looking for ways to fill their emptiness. The Waters sisters are done, I said, but there will always be others. That's why we keep watching, keep speaking up, keep protecting each other. Julia nodded, understanding. We'd learned young that safety isn't guaranteed, that sometimes the people meant to protect you fail, that evil can wear a teacher's smile or a counselor's concerned expression. But we'd also learned that truth has power, that kids who refuse to be silenced can bring down entire conspiracies, that friendship can be stronger than delusion. As we headed back inside, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Thank you for sharing your story at the conference. I think my daughter's teacher might be showing concerning behavior. Could we talk? I showed it to Julia. She smiled grimly. The work continues. Always. I agreed, already typing a response. Because that's what survivors do. We survive, we speak, we protect others, and we never ever stop watching.